This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Solutions, the leading iGaming PAM platform with a modular approach, including many benefits like a fast, secure, and scalable API-based platform, integrated with all major third-party products and services. Make sure you head over to Pragmatic Solutions and join our smart thinking.
And bingo, bango, bongo, we are back with another episode of Vested Interest here. Benji, Lloyd, great to see you guys again. Benji, how are you feeling after Vegas? How are you feeling after G2E? Still standing?
Still standing. It was definitely both a sprint and a marathon, as I like to say. It was for everyone that I spoke to as busy a G2E as there's ever been, probably busiest G2E that we've seen. And it was definitely a jam-packed week, but yeah, ready to go at it here on the pod.
Absolutely, and Lloyd, what were your impressions from G2E this year? I got as well the feeling that it was the biggest one for sure. Online felt to take a little bit more space than usual. From your perspective, we've been there many times. What was your experience like?
It was great. A lot of energy, a lot of positivity. Anyone who took Benji's warning from our last episode to heed the excess traffic caused by the F1 construction would have been well served to do so. I haven't taken so many 30-minute Uber rides in Las Vegas in a single week, probably my entire life as I did. But nonetheless, really, really great conference, really great energy, a lot of positivity. Got to check out a show at the Sphere before I left town, which was an awesome venue. I think I did the same one you did, Pierre. We're not quite at Benji's level of going to U2 yet, but I checked out the postcard show since I had a little less time. And I have to say, what a really, really amazing, one-of-a-kind venue to take in any form of entertainment. I saw Dana White wants to do a UFC event there now. I'm really excited to see what kind of crazy creative spins on conventional entertainment activities they are going to find a way to produce at that venue.
Yeah, you can tell that they've gotten their hands on a $2.5 billion toy, and they haven't exactly figured out what to do with it yet. I don't know if you got that feeling as well, Lloyd, from the Nature documentary. It feels like they can do so much more, you know.
I think we've only started to tap the potential, and we'll see some really, really cool, unique events there.
I'll say this also about G2E. I mean, technically it started on the Monday to Tuesday. Like this year, people began rolling into town in some instances, Pierre and Lloyd, the Thursday before G2E. I had G2E meetings that Thursday night, that Friday, that Saturday. Of course, there was a Challenger series or Challenger Summit on the Sunday hosted by GeoComply, which of course was a fantastic event. And, by the end of it, it kind of died out pretty quickly on Friday because everyone was just super exhausted. But, the G2E has kind of spread its wings a little wider than it has typically. And, ICE may be moving from London to Barcelona, but I don't think G2E is leaving Vegas anytime soon.
Oh, I don't know where we go, like Atlantic City?
No, I don't, Benji, I don't know if you made it over. I saw Pierre over at the event that Happy Hour did in that suite at the Palms that has a half basketball court inside it. It's a great event when your week is lined up with spending your time in those kind of places, for sure. That was a really cool event.
Yeah. Oh my God. That turned out to be a late night. I don't even want to think about it, that event. But we had a good time.
I think that was your birthday. That was your actual birthday, that event.
Yeah. It's I get the it's a blessing and a curse, I suppose, that my birthday falls on the G2E week every year. That I get to spend my birthday in Vegas every year. It's both good and bad, But yeah, we had a good time, that's for sure. As a little humble brag here, since Sphere was mentioned, by the way, I went there as well, like you said, Lloyd, and I brought my 360 camera with me, the Insta 360 camera here. And I was like, the Sphere has just opened a couple of days earlier, so I bet no one has done a really cool video from inside the Sphere. Like the internet is filled with images and videos that have gone viral from outside of the Sphere. So I posted, I did like what the kids do, I posted a video on TikTok that went viral. It got 10 million views. And when I gave this humble brag to my nieces, they had already seen the video, so I immediately became the cool uncle there. Me and the kids on TikTok, we still understand each other. So that was my highlight from D3.
That's great. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much. If only those likes could convert into dollar signs, but yeah, hopefully one day. Guys, I wanted to just throw in a little fun story here that popped up the other day, where the founder of a startup within the online sports betting space called BroThrow published an article where he accused ESPN Bet for plagiarizing his logo. I don't know if you guys saw this, but ESPN obviously launched their new logo. It's a kind of like dark blue and turquoise, I suppose, with the E with the B inside the E, the traditional like ESPN Bet kind of thing, and it's very similar to the BroThrow logo. I don't know if you guys saw this, and do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think ESPN Bet plagiarized the BroThrow logo, Lloyd?
I do not think that ESPN plagiarized the BroThrow logo. I think they are similar-ish, but not even that similar. Specifically, they are not similar in the way that matters for trademark infringement cases, which is that one would be likely to confuse. If I go out and sell hamburgers in my front yard and put a McDonald's logo on the table, I am unjustly enriching myself by benefiting from the hard work McDonald's has done to get people to associate their logo with a certain level of quality and convenience and safety and all of that. And so for there to be a real case here, you would have to show that people were downloading ESPN Bet because they thought it was BroThrow, essentially. And I think the likelihood of that being a case is close to zero. But with that said, I think there's a lot of evidence that this wasn't necessarily meant as a serious legal tactic, but perhaps more of a PR tactic. Still, remains to be seen and remains for, I guess, Brady, I think is his name at BroThrow, to state. But there were a few things that they said publicly that you usually would not say if you were actually planning on litigating. They very carefully worded some of their language to say things like, we just want to sit down with the folks at ESPN for a friendly conversation. And they definitely got quite a bit of publicity. Darren Ravel did an article about it. And so my thinking and my hope is that it is a pretty well-conceived publicity stunt rather than a fairly ill-conceived legal strategy.
Yeah.
I would concur with that. I think that's exactly what it is. It was some great PR for BroThrow, which is, look, I have a lot of respect for what those guys are doing, and they got a cool product, but relatively unknown in the grand scheme of things. And to get Darren Ravel to pick it up and create some exposure around it could potentially throw some eyeballs their way. And, any pub is good pub in that situation. So I think it's potentially a bit of a win for the BroThrow guys at ESPN's logo. Mirrors theirs in some capacity, but I can't see it going much further than that from a legal standpoint either.
I mean, guys, not to be too conspiratorial here, but like if I put the logos up here next to each other, it's like, yes, maybe they are a little bit different from each other. Wait, so that's the ESPN Bet, and then let me see if I can get the BroThrow. So it's like, let me see if I got, yeah. So like you have like the turquoise logo, and they are using the same kind of like dark blue as well, and the color coordinates are pretty much identical, to be perfectly honest. So like, not to be too conspiratorial here, but how likely is it that you choose exactly the same two colors for your logo? Maybe there's more to it than what you think.
Yeah. My best guess is that the ESPN folks or whoever was involved in putting that logo together, the first time they heard of BroThrow is when this article surfaced. That's my best guess. And no disrespect to the BroThrow guys in saying that.
Yeah, look, there's only a finite number of color combinations that exist. The ESPN trademark E is right in the middle of their logo. This is an industry where half the companies are probably named something where the word bet with a capital B is the primary word in the company name, lending itself to many, many logos that revolve around the letter B. But much more importantly, the question to ask yourself is, how many people are there in the world that are already familiar with the BroThrow logo and associate it positively in such a way that if they confused another app with the BroThrow logo, they would download that app, and then even after opening that app and seeing that it was, ESPN Bet, would deposit money and consistently participate as a paid consumer. There are probably tens, at most hundreds of people in the entire world to which that description applies. And I think that's the reason for which there would not be real legal merit to seeking damages here. I think it is much more of a fun and entertaining exercise that has certainly earned them some well-deserved publicity, if it was in fact the case that this was a deliberate PR stunt.
Yeah, and on the note of Brothrow using this as a clever PR tactic, I mean, we might as well give them the credit of explaining who they are, right? So Brothrow is kind of defining the social sports betting experience according to themselves. It's a kind of like a social sports betting platform over in the US, right? Can you guys do you guys know the company better than me?
I believe
Can we give them some
I have
credit?
not spoken to them. Yeah, I haven't spoken to them in a while now, so please, Brady, write in and tell us if we need to issue a correction here. But my understanding is that they're a platform where friends can challenge each other in various types of bets, sports betting related or otherwise, and that they serve mostly as a ledger that you then would settle up over Venmo or offline. And so you could think of them as sort of a social ledger for tracking the performance of various types of casual wagers between friends.
Fair enough. And, speaking of kind of these clever PR tactics and growth hacks, if you will, obviously both were great at maximizing this opportunity, let's say. Is there any other of these like clever PR tactics that you guys can think of in the past, perhaps by companies that you've seen that makes for an interesting story? Bundy?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been no shortage of them over the years. You can look at our friends Paddy Power over in Ireland and some of the stuff that they did, which was somewhat controversial and provocative.
Yeah.
But my favorite one was back in the day. I spent some fair bit of time out in Asia back in my Don Best days and growing the brand out there. And there was one Asian-facing sports book that was pursuing the Chinese marketplace. And what they did is they signed on with probably the most famous at the time, the number one sports star in China at that time was Paulino, and the Brazilian footballer. And he was playing for, I think it was one of the teams, Gonzaga Evergrande, if I'm not mistaken. And they paired him with whoever it was at the time was the most famous Asian porn star. I forget what her name was, but she was in the news for a whole bunch of stuff that she was up to back then. And here he was, the most famous footballer in China, one of the starting 11 on the Brazilian national team. And they paired the two of them together in a fairly provocative ad of sorts, and got released to the British media and then the Brazilian media, and then it went viral and it became kind of a little bit of a scandal. And as you know, or as you may not know, you can't advertise directly any gambling ad into the Chinese marketplace. But because this thing went viral globally, the story got picked up by the Chinese media and it became a huge controversy and sensation within China as well. And I mean, this sports book grew their organic traffic, I want to say 5x to 10x. I don't know the specifics of it, but that was a real go-to for organic traffic growth based on that. And their tactics worked. They went after it internationally without targeting the Chinese media, and it got picked up, and eventually the Chinese media picked it up, and it was a big coup for them. But, obviously, and Paulino then went on to play with Messi the following year, so it was a win for him.
Oh, wow.
His brand became more exposed, so it became a win all the way around. I'm not sure whatever became of the Asian porn star, but there you have it.
Wow, the Paris Hilton of the story. Yeah, I love it. Sex sells at the end of the day. Lloyd, what about you?
I don't know if I have anything quite that entertaining. I loved what Better did acquiring No House Advantage a few weeks ago, and it was like a bit on the smaller scale. But No House Advantage was a daily fantasy operator that ceased operations and stopped processing withdrawals while there were still some customers who had funds in their accounts. Better, particularly focusing on better picks, announced that they were acquiring the business and that all No House Advantage customers could now claim their full balances through the Better Picks app. Without any playthrough requirements, you download Better Picks and you can withdraw your entire No House Advantage balance. And my understanding is that there wasn't such a significant amount of total balances on hold anyway, and so it wouldn't have been such a enormous liability that Better was setting themselves up to potentially have to pay out. And nonetheless, they got a bunch of press. They probably acquired some non-trivial percentage of No House Advantage customers who decided to let that money ride and make accounts on Better. moving outside our industry, I think, Reddit is probably one of the most famous, and they even coined a term for what they did in their early days called Flintstoning, referring to the way the Flintstones operate a car that doesn't actually use wheels that work, but, Fred is just running his legs underneath the car. In the early days, the 2 or 3 founders of Reddit had 12 or 15 dummy accounts each, and they would manually stir up conversation in the community, because particularly when you have marketplace-based companies, growth hacking is especially important, where users are not interested in participating on the platform unless other users are doing so. And so Reddit very famously, with just a few employees, gave the impression that there were dozens or hundreds of people. But very quickly, I just always like to talk about something that PointsBet did that I thought was so clever in 2019. A year after PASPA, it was not a commonplace thing for operators in the U.S. to be doing bad beat refunds and karma committee and refunding people's bets when a player sat out. It was almost relatively unheard of at the time. It was just not something anyone was focusing on. And obviously at that time, New Jersey was one of the predominant players in the space. There were only a few states legal. New Jersey was getting a lot of betting handle from New York, and there's plenty of New York sports fans in New Jersey as it is. And in 2019, the Astros beat the Yankees en route to the World Series, and it was later found out that they had cheated and done some stuff that was against the rules. And so the PointsBet team sent out this ad that said, the Astros cheated. If you bet on the Yankees during the playoffs, we are refunding your bet in its entirety. And if you bet at another operator, we'll still refund your bet up to $100. Just send us a copy of your bet slip, make a PointsBet account, and we'll credit your account with that much. And again, it's hard to step back in time, because now if I told you that, you would, especially in the U.S., say, well, of course, that is a gimmick designed to stir up publicity. But it wasn't such a common practice at the time. And so it really went viral that PointsBet was refunding up to $100 bets on competitor platforms. In reality, we all know if you can steal a competitor in this, a user directly from a competitor in this industry and pay a fraction of what is otherwise the weighted average customer acquisition cost, that is a great deal. And so I thought that type of thinking, especially early on, was really emblematic of a clever leveraging of growth hackiness and viral publicity to drive business when they were a challenger brand and they were trying to fight for scraps among much larger, well-capitalized operators.
Yeah, that's a great example, Lloyd. And as you point out, it's many other learned from that, of course, afterwards, and it became somewhat standard. I have a similar story to what you mentioned at first here, Lloyd, with the acquisition and the payout that resulted from that. If we roll back the tape around 12 or 13 years or so, for those of you guys who were in the industry at that time, you'll remember Black Friday that happened at that time when many of the kind of US-facing major poker sites were shut down from one day to the other by the FBI. One of the sites that was shut down at that time was Full Tilt Poker. And Full Tilt was at that time the biggest poker site in the world. And from one day to the other, poof, you couldn't access your account. Your player accounts were frozen. No way to claim that money back. So hundreds of thousands, if not millions of players were not able to access their funds on Full Tilt from one day to the other. And what happened during that time was quite interesting, because many professional players, they had, millions of dollars deposited to Full Tilt, basically their entire net worth in many cases. Some other poker players that were not affected, that were quite liquid, what they started to do is they started to sell insurance. So they would go to players on Full Tilt and they would tell them, if you can prove how much you had in your account, just take a screenshot. I will pay you 30% of that if I can take ownership of the account, in the hope of one day this account balance will be locked up, essentially. And so many of the pro poker players, they bought that insurance. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, PokerStars acquires Full Tilt, basically to just acquire the database. And they announced that they will pay out all the balances. So all these people who sold insurance at that time made a lot of money on that deal happening between PokerStars and Full Tilt. I thought that was one of the best kind of stories that I heard, and obviously that generated a lot of positive feedback for PokerStars as well.
I mean, those guys are gamblers for a reason, right? So they made a good bet on that one for sure.
Also worth
Absolutely.
noting, there was a ton of that exact same stuff going on the weekend that it was unclear if Silicon Valley Bank was going to be solvent. Exact same
All
situation.
right.
Companies had their deposits locked up, and people were offering to buy claims on those deposits for 80, 90 cents on the dollar. And there were some companies who said, look, we need to make sure that we can make payroll on Monday. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. But there is something almost more interesting and entertaining about the poker version of it, for sure.
Absolutely. And Lloyd, since you mentioned the great kind of like origin story of Reddit, I want to mention also like the all-time great growth hack story and like kind of the founder journey that ever existed in the tech world, which is the origin story of Tinder. I don't know if you read about this as well, but they just have the most incredible story ever, in kind of like how they were able to get their feet off the ground. Because at that time, Tinder, they tried to create a dating app for people, for students, and this was at a time where online dating was considered like the most uncool thing ever, right? It was like dating.com and match.com. It was kind of like, a bit uncool. If you're not able to succeed in the real world, the last resort is kind of Match.com, and no one would really talk about it and so on. And Tinder, they figured out the best way how to get cool people to use Tinder, and that was by throwing the coolest. They would contact the coolest people at certain colleges, and they would tell them, host the most amazing party you've ever hosted. We're gonna pay for it. But there's one catch, and that's going to be that there's a security guard at the door, and that security guard will make sure that everyone at this party has downloaded Tinder. And then what would happen is these kids would go to the party, and then the next day they would wake up with this app on their phone, and maybe they saw someone at the party that they liked, but they didn't speak to, so they would go on the app and then find that person there. And they would then be able to kind of like generate a bit of a network effect within that college that would then grow organically, because all the cool kids were there, so then everyone else wanted to be on Tinder, and then it grew and grew and grew. I thought that was just an excellent growth hack as well. From
that story, the Reddit story, these are all detailed. People, if they're interested, should read The Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen.
That's it, Andrew Chen.
Who does all of these. And they focus mostly on growth hacks in marketplace businesses that require social networks or network effects to succeed, because those are the ones in which growth hacking is the most dire of a need, and therefore where you get some of these incredible stories from. So definitely highly recommend Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen for people interested in the topic.
Yeah, it's an incredible book about understanding network effects, right? You have like the hard side of the network, the easy side of the network, and how it's kind of like a chicken and egg in many cases. Hence the name.
But it's funny. I recommended it to a founder recently, and he said, "But I'm not building a marketplace business." And my response was that I see this more as a book about growth hacking and creative, scrappy ways to gaining distribution than inherently a marketplace book. It's just that marketplaces are the companies most reliant on solving those problems early. So yeah, great read. Definitely on every list of top 10 books that entrepreneurs should read. It always comes up.
And we're talking about all of these kind of growth hacks and PR stunts that have worked out. It would be interesting to think of some that have gone wrong. Maybe we'll leave that one for a separate podcast and a separate topic, because there must be some out there.
Yeah. We don't tend to hear about those the failed ones, that's for sure. But it goes it goes hand in hand with the I think that underlying message that you mentioned, Lloyd, is very much in these like success stories. They start by founders really going granular in their approach. So in the Reddit story, it's not about like, they don't have unlimited funds to spread the word and to do mass marketing, but they themselves, they are making the individual one by one post in order for the site to be active. And same on the Tinder story, organizing those like singular parties before the networking effect takes over by themselves. And I think maybe that is the lesson overall here, is that even if you're a founder and you raise a good amount of capital, that kind of like granular one-to-one approach in order to get your business going in many cases is essential, right? In order to kind of build that first liquidity and get the name out there and so on and so forth.
Sure. Y Combinator always summarizes this feedback to their founders and says, do things that don't scale in the early days. Be willing to do things that are not scalable as a way to reach product market fit. Absolutely.
Yeah, love that. I want to move on here today as well. And something I took with me from my visit to G2E is there was a lot of talk around sweepstakes, social casinos, kind of like alternative products to the traditional sports betting and online gambling sector in the US, and it's seemingly becoming more popular now. The sweepstakes segment. It seems like more and more people are looking at the opportunities over there. Previously, it felt like sweepstakes casinos have been flying a little bit under the radar, but it's becoming more and more talked about now. So I wanted to lift that as a conversation today. First and foremost, the definition of sweepstakes. From my perspective, what I see around sweepstakes is like the traditional Coca-Cola competition where, you buy a bottle of Coke, and if you unscrew the cork, there's a code in the bottom of the cork, and you can enter that code to be a part of a sweepstakes lottery, essentially. That's like a traditional sweepstakes competition. But in the case of these sweepstakes casinos, maybe Lloyd, starting to you, can you talk a little bit more, maybe the definition of what the sweepstakes is, and how that translates into the online casino world?
Yeah, no, sure. Happy to do that with, first of all, the disclaimer that I am not a lawyer. I am definitely not your lawyer. If you are a listener contemplating running a sweepstakes business, I'll try to discuss what is the kernel concept at the root of these sweepstakes businesses. But the reality is that most of the companies operating this space have many, many facets to them that they leverage to insulate themselves from regulatory risk far beyond probably just the one element that I can speak to and maybe offer some clarity on now. We all know, I think, that gambling or activities which require a gambling license to operate are those which contain three components: consideration, chance, and prize. Consideration, you pay something to enter the contest. Chance, the outcome of the contest is determined randomly. And prize, based on the outcome, you receive something of value, or you may receive something of value. Now, you just described very popularly the type of sweepstakes contests people are used to confronting at the supermarket, for example. By the way, if you're interested in the topic, there's a great documentary called Pepsi, Where's My Jet on Netflix that goes into the really interesting legal facets and some great drama that occurred with a context of the like that you are describing. Highly recommend it. But let's think, for example, about what you just described. So you have to pay to buy a bottle of Coke, and then you open up the cap, and according to a random number generator, essentially, there may or may not be a symbol on your cap or an entry form into a drawing that is determined randomly. And then based on the outcome, you win a prize. And at first glance, it feels like, well, that seems to fit the definition of illegal gambling. Why doesn't Coca-Cola need a gambling license to offer these promotions? And the answer is that many years ago, it was decided that very clearly these are not the types of gambling that gambling licenses are intended to cover. They are not illegal lotteries in the way that illegal lotteries were meant to be defined. And so there was a carved out category, if you will, of contests that are now called sweepstakes, which were immune to the need for gambling licensing, specifically because they provide something called an alternative means of entry. You can buy a bottle of Coca-Cola and untwist the cap, but assuredly there also is some fine print that says instead you can mail a postcard to a particular address and you will equivalently be entered in that same contest. And because there is now no longer mandatory consideration, you can enter this contest, which is determined by chance and does pay a prize, but you can enter for free without paying consideration. In theory, that means, or not in theory, in practice, that means you no longer fulfill all three criterias, and therefore you as Coca-Cola do not need a gambling license to offer a chance at winning a lifetime supply of Coca-Cola. More recently, what companies have done, companies that refer to themselves as sweepstakes sportsbooks or sweepstakes casino companies, etc., is they have applied a similar approach using this alternative means of entry concept. Most sweepstakes casinos or sportsbooks are platforms where you purchase tokens, you make predictions or bets with those tokens, and then you redeem the resulting tokens for prizes or cash. On all of these platforms, similar to what you could do with a bottle of Coca-Cola, there is an address that you can send a postcard to that will allow you to receive the tokens for free. And so similar to what Coca-Cola claims when they operate a sweepstakes, these casino and sportsbooks companies say, we do not have mandatory consideration because all of our games can be entered for free through an alternative means of entry that is of equal dignity to the paid entry method. And therefore, we do not need a gambling license in the same manner that Coca-Cola does not need one when they offer their sweepstakes. So in short, again, that's an oversimplification. Most of the sweepstakes companies have many other elements that also provide additional regulatory coverage. But that is the insight or the carve out or the legal logic that is at the root of the growth of sweepstakes gaming.
Right. And doesn't it feel a little bit like the sweepstakes casinos are somewhat dancing on a very thin line here between what is classified as sweepstakes and what is not classified as sweepstakes? I am not an expert at all myself, but the purpose of the sweepstakes, as you point out, Lloyd, is that you should be able to compete on and you should be able to bet on the same terms, whether you pay or whether you don't pay. For it to be classified as a sweepstakes competition. Doesn't it feel a little bit like the casinos are really like dancing on the line here?
I mean, what I would say to that, Pierre, is, I mean, and yet both yes and no. You know, it's obviously one can view it as a workaround, but they're working with the confines of sweepstake law that's been established on a state-by-state basis, and are working with the confines of what those sweepstake laws allow. You know, just as an aside, when I was a kid, I wasn't much of a Pepsi guy. I was more that McDonald's monopoly, and I would go back to McDonald's. I would never mail it in. I would just go back and eat more Big Macs as a 10-year-old to try and win whatever the hell. I think up in Canada, I was trying to win hockey sticks or hockey skates. And I never won, obviously, but neither here nor there. And to Lloyd's point, they're nuancing. You know, the sweeps companies. You know, they're nuancing it again, and it differentiates for each company with the ability to participate via different measures as well. You might be given a certain number of free credits in a given day, and the more that you're playing, the more free credits you can get as well. So, you know, it's nuanced. Is it a workaround? One can view it as such, but it's also embedded in what the existing sweepstakes law are for that given state.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's underappreciated. Certainly, I understand why some people's intuition is that it does not feel that operating a de facto online casino was the intention of the original lawmakers who sought to carve out Coca-Cola's ability to offer promotional sweepstakes. And there are a select few states who have said that sweepstakes are not allowed if they are a game for the game's sake. They are only allowed if they are a game for the sake of a promotion or some other motivation. But that is only a select few states. And so when Benji talks about these companies operating within the confines, very specifically, there is case law where, for example, it was litigated, millions of dollars spent through multiple court cases as to whether something called continuous play is a necessary component of a legal sweepstakes business. There were some sweepstakes businesses that were operating, and they would allow you to receive free tokens, but once you ran out of those, you could only receive additional free tokens, let's say 24 hours later and 48 hours beyond that. Otherwise, you had to purchase tokens. And a court decided, and all of this is very public, and the court's decisions are all public, that forcing someone to purchase coins because they cannot receive free coins for another 24 hours actually makes it a not legal sweepstakes, because now you don't have an alternative mean of entry that is of equal dignity to the paid metric. So every good, smart sweepstakes company operator today has a law firm that tracks all of these little decisions that have been made where courts over the years have said, you must have this specific mechanism. You may not have this other specific mechanism. And that is the way in which they are operating in a compliant fashion. Can any regulator and any jury and any judge decide anything, anywhere, at any time? Essentially, yes. We're all just people. Everyone are just human beings. So there is no such thing as a bulletproof legal opinion or legal argument or anything like that. But I do think it is underappreciated how well researched and based in case law the majority of the approaches of the sweepstakes gaming companies are in today's market.
And to that end, Pierre, like, we're still somewhat, I mean, sweepstakes are by no means in their infancy as an industry, but as it pertains to the casino and sports and other verticals within real money gaming, it is still relatively in its infancy, and there's no shortage of startups right now that are coming onto the landscape that are making their move and that are embracing the opportunity to build a business around using this dynamic and around the sweeps model. And it's growing in popularity, and we're seeing a lot more of it. And the existing players in the space have proven that they can grow it at a very reasonable scale. You know, when you look at companies like Chumba, and you look at on the sports betting side at some of the companies that are there. So within casino, within sportsbook, and now other verticals where we're seeing startups come into the space, I think that the more interesting piece of this will be the story going forward, as opposed to what has transpired to date. Will we see the bigger sportsbook and casino operators in the space push back at this the same way that they're now pushing back at other verticals like DFS 2.0? And will we see more and more states begin to create carve-outs the way we just seen in Michigan, where VGW, which operates Chumba, has now pulled out of Michigan, if I've read correctly. So, you know, it'll be interesting to track this story going forward. We certainly haven't heard the last of it. In fact, I would say we're in the really early stages of what this will all mean going forward.
Right. It's an interesting kind of product from that perspective, is that we just don't know exactly how this is going to turn out as we go forward. But so to your point, Lloyd, if I understand things correctly, essentially there is like a barrier to entry here, right? If you want to launch a sweepstakes casino, which is the fact that in order to get it right, you need to have extremely good legal advice, right? There's like a myriad of issues that you can run into. And I would assume that there isn't perhaps that many experts or lawyers that can help you on that front. So I would assume that just in order to launch your sweepstake operation, it's just very difficult. Like there's a high barrier to entry there, and maybe that's why it's also kind of a Chumba enjoyed that kind of incumbent. They almost own the entire market there for quite some time before new entrants are now coming to market.
Yeah, it's true. And not to get too in the weeds, but there's also operational complexities. You have to be able to set up to process postcards or whatever the alternative means of entry is. And then there's something called alternative means of entry abuse. If people are going to let you get free casino chips effectively that you can play casino games with, well, assuredly there will be some people who attempt to exploit that and claim an unlimitedly large number of free tokens for themselves across, distributed anonymized accounts. And so in addition to the legal prowess, you do need somewhat sophisticated and complex operational infrastructure to ingest the alternative means of entry and also prevent fraud and abuse coming through that channel.
Brilliant. Super interesting. We are sure to follow up on this topic as it is heating up now in the North American online gambling space. This is just the beginning, and people are trying to kind of get their head around this concept now. So I think it's interesting to bring this conversation to light at the moment. I want to move on a little bit to the next point, which is, every time here at the Vested Interest, we try to bring some wisdom in from you guys as professional investors who meet a lot of founders and deal with the dynamics between the founders and the investors and so on. And a topic that I want to bring up today is kind of like what attributes are needed to be a successful founders. You guys speak to founders on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure that you guys have kind of seen some red threads of kind of attributes that many or most founders have. So I want to start off with you, Benji. When you look at founders, when you meet a founder for the first time, is it any particular attributes that you are looking for carefully?
I don't know if there's any one attribute. I'm kind of looking at that individual, and we've spoken about this before, but one of the number one criteria in making a decision to invest in a company isn't just how good the business plan isn't just how large the TAM is and what we feel the market opportunity is, but it's our belief that founder is someone who will find a way to get things done. So if I were to kind of narrow it down and looking at a founder, there's so many attributes that I look at in terms of that individual, but I guess a couple that really boil down for me is this someone who views the opportunity the same way that I do? And it doesn't mean that I'm right and that they're wrong, or that they're right or that I'm wrong. It's just a question of synchronization. It's not a question of just not every founder is the right fit for every investor. So for me as an investor, when I look at that founder, it's the way that they view the opportunity the way that they view the industry as a whole, the way that they view, the way that they're going to approach this business and any business for that matter, does that jive with the way that I want to work alongside that founder? And if the answer to that question isn't emphatically yes, I'm going to be very resistant or hesitant to want to commit more time to assessing that founder and to assessing the viability of that opportunity. So I know that that's kind of like a short answer and a simplistic answer, but ensuring that the two of us, or the group of founders and myself, are aligned in how on how we're going to be able to row the rowboat collectively in the path forward, because it's their show and I'm just here to support them. But if I'm not able to be aligned with the way in which they're approaching this thing in all facets of how they approach the opportunity, then it's going to be a long slog and the wrong approach for me and the wrong foot to get off on as a starting point.
Right. So it's not so much about specific person attributes or and so on. It's more for you to connect with the person in order to understand them, let's say.
I could definitely get into a whole bunch of attributes, and I hope I don't steal all of Lloyd's thunder if I do so. But, if I were to come into one attribute, I'm looking at, is this a founder who will, how adaptable is that founder, their adaptability and their ability to do whatever it takes to find a solution to a problem in order to guide a ship to where it's going to need to go. Because when you start a business, you don't know what you don't know, and there's 101 things that you can't know. And there's things that you can't plan for and that you can't predict. And what I would want to be is aligned with a founder who has the type of personality, the type of mentality, and that level of perseverance and that level of adaptability to find a solution to all of the micro problems that will come along on a daily basis alongside this journey in order to deal with the macro problem of getting to where they want to go. So I'll stop there and let Lloyd jump in and add his tidbits.
Yeah, I would just add from my perception of deals that Benji and I have looked at together, I also would say I think one of the attributes that makes someone more likely to be a good fit to work with Benji is just incredibly rigorous work ethic. That's what Benji has exhibited in his career, and to his credit, he expects a lot out of his founders, but he doesn't expect anything more than what he put in when he was building his business. And I think he likes to see, hey, look, I built a business and made some money off it. If I'm going to give someone else that money to build another business, they better be working at least as hard as I worked when I built my business. And I think, all investors like rigorous work ethic, but I do notice that I think Benji has an especially deep appreciation for someone who's just a tenaciously hard worker. I'm thinking about, my answers here. And the problem, I suppose, is that I read another Paul Graham essay last night. Paul Graham's the founder of Y Combinator. He's posted pretty much all of his thoughts on startups and investing on a blog and on the internet. And he is probably one of the most insightful and articulate people about startups and startup investing. And so the problem is that anytime I read something that he writes, I immediately become incapable of articulating it in a better or different manner, because he's just that good at articulating all the points that I could wish to articulate. So the only thing I have stuck in my head right now are the 5 Paul Graham attributes that he looks for, because I just can't think of anything smarter. So maybe what I'll do is let's
get him on the pod. Lloyd, let's get him on the podcast.
Yeah.
That would be great. Let me rattle off his 5, and I'll superimpose some of my commentary on a couple of those, perhaps. The first one is determination. No surprise there, but I do think people who haven't been founders before do not understand just how hard it is. Forgetting all of the operational and executional aptitude you need to have. Just the length of the sales cycles, the length of the feedback cycles, the amount of negative feedback, the amount of demoralizing things you are inevitably going to encounter. They just require a superhuman, delusional level of determination, I think, to overcome. Number 2 is flexibility. You need to be determined, but coachable and adaptable. And I think when someone is betting on you at the seed stage, they are not betting on your business or your traction. They're betting on you to take feedback from the market and iterate to the point of success. Number 3 is imagination. Imagination and creativity are rare. It is really easy to criticize other people's new ideas. It is really hard to come up with new ideas yourself. It is rare to truly have an imagination, to be able to imagine the world in a completely different way in the not too distant future based on new products and services. And not only imagine, but then backtrack and figure out the concrete steps that need to exist between now and then to make that imagination into a reality. Number 4 and 5, I think, are two of the more interesting ones. Number 4 is friendship. And it describes the fact that to build a successful business, you are going to need to manage an incredible number of relationships. I think this is a bit what Benji's talking about when he talks about rowing the boat in the same direction and viewing the world in the same way. To be a founder, to build a 10, 15-year company, you need to be able to make and build relationships that can survive turbulence, that can survive adversarial short-term hiccups. I know some investors who grill founders on how close they are today with their childhood friends because they believe that is an indicator of this person's ability to maintain relationships over time. And then number 5 is by far my favorite, and it's what Paul Graham calls naughtiness. And he talks about the fact that successful founders are overwhelmingly very, very good people, but they have what he calls a piratical gleam in their eye. They're not the goody two-shoes type. They care about getting the big questions right, but not observing proprieties. They almost hate doing things if it is purely because that is the way things are done and there is no better reason for it than that. And they almost delight in breaking rules as long as they are not the rules that really, really matter. And so I think there's a really interesting dynamic to what Paul Graham calls naughtiness. Not a lack of ethics, not evilness, not an uncompromising ability to consider the needs of others, but just a piratical gleam in the eye, I think is that last element that can really make for someone who can rearrange the world about their will.
Yeah, and to rephrase that last point a little bit, it's almost like founders are creative and CEOs are structured. Right, it goes to a point where the founder, that's kind of like gleefulness. The company becomes so big that you need someone else to take over after a while because you need that structure. Apple is a good example, right, with Steve Jobs, who's a bit nuttiness and creativity and so on, would probably not suit the company today as big as it is and so on, as it used to do in the 2000s. I would like to submit another one. This from kind of left field here as well. I think this was also in Andrew Chan's book, actually. I could be wrong here. It could be in another book, but it's a similar book to that, which kind of explore like the interesting fact that many of the founders in successful tech companies have Asperger's syndrome. And it talks about like, what's the correlation there between a successful tech entrepreneur and Asperger's syndrome? Elon Musk is a good example, of course. Mark Zuckerberg, potentially, Peter Thiel, those guys are a little bit on the spectrum, you could argue. And he talks about, when you are facing this enormous challenge that you have with your idea to go from idea to action, many people will tell you that this is impossible, you cannot do this, you should focus on something else instead, or they will tell you, okay, it's a great idea, but you should do it a little bit differently. And people with Asperger have more hard time to understand social cues. And so therefore, they won't take on board the negative feedback and the ideas that people throw at them all the time in order to like divert from the original vision. And so they stay with this very like unorthodox vision. It obviously doesn't work all the time, but I would also submit that if you listen to too many advice or to what too many people say at the beginning of your founder journey, you probably won't get very far. You need to really look into your vision to some extent, especially on the tech kind of industry, which is it's so unlikely that a company will go from 0 to 1 billion, right? There will be 99.9% casualties for every success story, but that success story is probably going to be the person who stuck with their idea when everyone told them no. So I thought that was a quite interesting observation.
Yeah, it is an interesting observation. I think a critical piece here is whether you're passively investing or actively investing, right? So if I'm passively investing into a company, then the characteristics of that entrepreneur can vary from if I'm going to be actively investing and working alongside that entrepreneur to help them in their journey in an active way, in which how we work together becomes very relevant. But if I'm passively investing, which I rarely do, but on occasion I will, then if they're kind of like a mad genius with some great ideas that can turn into a 10,000x, go to it. But I think that it's an important distinction.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to, and this applies to investors as well. And I think we're going to have Roger Ehrenberg on here a little, who I'm excited to ask about this because it's something he has talked about a lot. You have to be comfortable looking like you are wrong to almost everyone for a long period of time. I think, as a founder or as an early stage investor, and that I think is sort of the superset of the examples that you're talking about. By the way, I believe those are Peter Thiel talking points, not Andrew Chen. But Peter Thiel also great. Everyone should read 0 to 1. Everyone should watch all.
Oh, it's 0 to 1. That's a book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably in 0 to 1.
Yep.
You guys are giving a lot of recommended. You guys are giving a lot of recommended reading today, so bear that in mind. We got our listeners have a lot of reading to do between now and the next podcast.
Lots of homework for the readers. Yeah, we'll do quiz next week. It's quiz. I love it. All right. Roger Ehrenberg, managing partner of II Capital Partners, II Sport Ventures, and Eberg Capital. It's great to have you with us here, Roger. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Pierre.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So I got to know you, Roger, a couple of months ago after the latest capital round was closed by Better, where you wrote a really interesting piece about the kind of investment case here for Better that was really interesting to read through. And so we thought it was really interesting to have you on here today. Obviously, you have a long background with a CV that is longer than my arm in the investing world or in the US. And we wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more because we know that obviously you are not exclusively investing into the online sport betting space. It's not particularly your background, but it seems to be an industry that you have found interesting here, that you have found interested in here recently. So I wanted to just kick off here, Roger, by asking you, when did you discover the online sports betting space, and what was it that made you interested in seeking investments in this space?
So first off, thanks for having me here, Pierre. And I think the length of my CV is directly proportionate to my ancient status. But as it relates to sports betting and my original interest, certainly I followed, FanDuel and DraftKings. They were, venture-backed companies in the U.S. And as a venture capitalist, I was, pretty much on top of the financings and the industries, and also being a sports fan, I obviously was aware of sports betting since I was a little kid, and it was not done through these formal mechanisms, but done with friends in this kind of peer-to-peer way. But then it really kind of accelerated with my sons who are now 26 and 23, but even, dating back to their time in junior high school, and they were both accomplished athletes, but as you may know, a lot of athletes also really enjoy sports betting because they're sports fanatics and they have lots of friends and they love to bet. And so I really got a window into that with the two of them. And then when they started doing it more regularly, and especially when they went to college, where they would use a mix of offshore, traditional regulated OSB, and shall we say under the cover sports books that other students ran, really got a sense of how sports betting had entered the zeitgeist in a way that I really couldn't have imagined. And it wasn't so much about making money per se. I mean, people want to win, but it really was very social, and it really deepened engagement with the live sports that they were watching. So that made me pay attention. And then when I left kind of running the venture firm that I'd founded, which did not invest in anything remotely like what Eberg is investing in now, I started to spend a lot more time thinking about some of those themes that I'd noticed in their activity around sports betting, and the fact that it kind of crystallized in this kind of thematic view that I had about the ascendancy of sports and all those things around it that accentuated the viewing experience, like betting, like social, like new sports entering the market. And Better in particular sits at the intersection of a lot of these megatrends of making sports betting easier, having sports betting be more akin to entertainment with their RG focus and with deposit limits and credit card limits and things that they built in at first principles, not attracting kind of the degen better, but really betting as entertainment, having a single screen experience and being really excited about sports media, but also alternative sports. So anyway, that was a very interesting value prop. And then you layer on kind of the whole micro betting notion and the kind of ADD fueled wanting to bet on the next play, on the next moment, better offered a value proposition that to me was distinctly different than the two largest players in the market and even like the next handful of secondary players in the market. And that's why I got involved.
Hey, Roger, you touched on so many themes there. There's probably about 10 or 15 follow-on questions I can ask from that. But I want to hone in on, obviously we allude to your involvement in investments in the sports betting side, but you yourself spoke about it being beyond just that. It's about social, it's about sports engagement. And you allude to about the emergence of some of these secondary or alternative sports, as you mentioned. And I know that there's a couple of investments that you have made that touch around that, which I think is really interesting. And in particular, I'd love to hear a bit more of your perspective on SlamBall, which I remember it from when I was a kid, and now I see it reemerging. And I know that you're a big player in its reemergence. I'd love to kind of hear how that came on and where your thought process is within that, and by extension, all of the alternative sports and the role that they're going to play in our ecosystem.
Benji, I think that's a great question. It really does tie together a lot of these threads, because when I look at SlamBall and what made us so excited to be a key part of its reemergence, it is a lot of the things that made me excited about Better. It's a sport that is almost purpose made for social, for TikTok and Insta Reels. It is a sport of moments, lots of action, always going, 20-minute games, 30-minute TV games, but 20 minutes of gameplay, constant substitution, tons of micro bettable moments. And so one of our key theses in looking at SlamBall on the monetization piece was, well, is this something that sports bettors would find exciting and something that was just another opportunity for them for engagement, and that's something that was inherently social? And we thought the answer was yes. And in the early days, it's kind of proven to be that way. But it's also, I think, it speaks to kind of the fragmentation of sports viewership and the fact that while the largest sports, the most established sports, are enjoying their kind of economic renaissance with the explosion of value of media rights, you're now seeing this rise of secondary and tertiary sports, some which are very new, kind of being bracketed on the not so new but rapidly ascendant end of UFC, which really has its precursors over 20 years ago. So they're like the 20-year overnight success, right? And then you've got, like PFL and somebody that's been around for, call it, 5 years, that's following a similar path. And then you've got all these other sports like pickleball and TGL and SlamBall, and even things like another company's Pro League Network that literally programs alternative sports and makes them bettable, like World Putting League or Long Drive or Slap Fight or Card-Jitsu. And the thing is, all of these things have their own cult followings, and these people are super, super, super engaged, and they all want to bet on it. So when you start aggregating these disparate eyeballs from these kind of fragmented audiences, it ends up being a very, very large number and a much faster growing number than the top tier sports. So that's another thing that kind of informs my interest in a platform like Better and a sport like SlamBall, is they're really doing the same thing. It's creating engaging, social, shareable content that is bettable and something that's new and fresh.
That was great, Roger. I just want to say, first of all, I've had a great pleasure to work with you on a few cap tables and advisory boards, and I hope everyone getting to listen to this today has that privilege, because I just learned so much from you and from Ethan and from Andrew every time we talk, even when there's not a direct lesson being taught from your perspective. Perhaps there's just so much wisdom that you bring to the table. Every question you ask, I feel like I learned something new. I'll ask you a question here that really I'm just kind of selfishly motivated to hear your answer about, and I've seen you write about a bit, and it's really a totally different direction from where we started. I've seen you speak a lot about how success as a venture capitalist requires an almost ungodly tolerance for looking wrong for a very long time before anyone else starts thinking that you were right or smart in the first place. And I will tell you, that was not something I was prepared for embarking on my career in venture capital. And it has really surprised me how truly challenging and often kind of isolating that can be, because there are not so many people in the world that you can lean on who are going through it with you at the same time. And just if you could talk more about any angle of this, why is it so hard? What is so hard about it? Why can't you just be a good VC and look right for your whole career? I think it'd be awesome to hear your perspective on any of this.
Sure, Lloyd. I mean, it's just so funny to hear you say these things. I mean, I have so much empathy and certainly remember my days as early in my VC career where it just hit me like a ton of bricks that, there's this perception that venture is such a glamorous, exciting, glitzy field. And if you're doing early stage venture, that could not be further from the truth. It can be soul crushing, moments of incredible self-doubt, and just hard and scary because so much is out of your control. And, I think getting back into the very early stage venture game, pre-seed and seed, that I'm now doing at Eberg, which of course I had done at IA, and even before that for my own account, the fact that I've chosen to do this again and to feel all of this pain and stress all over again when I don't have to is informative. And I think what it's really indicative of is the fact that it is also among the most satisfying pursuits when things work. And being able to be passionate and professional, but to also acknowledge that you are going to lose. There are times when, regardless of the best efforts of founders, your own best efforts and your co-investors' best efforts, sometimes it could be the wrong time. It could be you went down a particular path for too long and then you hit the wall and you couldn't convince enough people to give it another chance. Myriad reasons why things don't work, but to then be able to be resilient and say, okay, I'm going to end this engagement with dignity and I'm going to help these founders however I can, even acknowledging that there's no economic benefit for me. It's really an ethical and moral way of doing business. Then there are those times when you hit it and you happen to have identified the right market opportunity, the right product sensibility, the right founding team to execute it, and the right moment in the market when it was ready. And that makes those 10 prior failures where you felt absolutely crappy about yourself and how good you were as a VC, it makes you really look at it differently. So it is not for the faint of heart, especially, again, doing pre-seed and seed. Doing growth is a different animal. That's much more akin to the riskier end of private equity than it is to any form of venture. But doing the kinds of things that you and I do, which is very, very similar, you just really need to remind yourself that the batting average thing, especially if you're doing it right, which means swinging for the fences. So, you might not have a 300 batting average. You might have a 200 or a 150 batting average. But if you're hitting grand slams and batting 150, you will have one of the most successful venture funds of all time. That's just the way the power law works.
Roger, you spoke about, you allude to how there's so much that's out of your control when you write a check. And obviously you want to be more than just a check writer. You want to be a part of that process going forward to empower that founding group in any way that you can. But there are things that are out of your control. We were speaking earlier amongst the three of us about founders and the characteristics that we look for in founders. What to you are the most important characteristics outside of the business plan and outside of the market opportunity when you kind of look at your career and the founders who have had that success and the things that you look for in aligning with?
Yeah, Benji, awesome. Yeah, I mean that's really a question that I've been thinking about for 20 years and continue to ask myself every day, because therein lies the key to front end screening: is can you possibly know enough to such that your lens is better than somebody else's lens as to the probability of that venture succeeding. So I think one thing that's a common thread at I'll call it at a 10,000 foot level, is founders who have a non-negotiable vision, but highly negotiable missions. And what I mean by that is they have clarity as to what the future is going to look like and what they are building, and that simply does not change. So it could be, in my past life, Jeff Green at the trade desk being all ads will be bought and sold like high frequency trading. Everything will be programmatic. Okay. And that ad buyers are going to look like software engineers, not like cigar chomping executives in the upfronts in a smoky room figuring out, how to spend $100 million. And he had that view. The company almost died multiple times. He pushed on through, and it's now a $40 billion company. So as you collide with the market, yes, in that moment, you might need to adjust strategy, develop a new set of experiments, all with that same ultimate goal. But your path towards getting there will necessarily adjust based on market realities, competitive responses, macroeconomic environment, what have you. So that's one thing. Another thing that, again, partly evidenced through Jeff's story is, I know, and this is going to sound trite, but like grit, or this relentlessness and resilience. It's where, again, in my 20 years of experience doing venture, I have never backed a company that has been up and to the right from earliest days, ever. Every company, even the decacorns that I've been part of from earliest days, had existential risk and almost life-ending struggles. But those founders simply figured it out. They would not stop. They were incredibly, and this is a word that my partners at IA, Brad and Jesse, and I used to talk about a lot, is they were unnaturally resourceful. They were not super dependent on me or the other investors. They would ask for advice and counsel and help if they needed it, but fundamentally they owned it. They were the ones that took the responsibility. It was their thing, and they were going to make it succeed. And again, that sounds like, well, obviously founders have that. I will tell you, in my experience, relatively few, forget about founders, relatively few people have that, because it comes back to something Lloyd's heard me say before, and I'll say it for the podcast, is being in venture, which is seed stage venture, which is the same thing as being like a founder. You are signing up for incredible pain. There's just no way around it. In the best of cases, it's incredibly painful to get to where you want to get to. And as humans, we're pain averse. If we can be avoidant, we'll avoid. Why touch the hot fire? Why run that extra mile? Why make that 58th phone call when, if you do 30, that feels like you've kind of done your job. This isn't about doing your job. It's about winning. And in some cases, it's about surviving. So, but I'd say those two things, one which directly relates to the other, I know what I'm doing for the long run. How I get there may change based upon exogenous factors that I can't predict today. And as those things happen to me, I am going to have the strength, the stamina, the resilience, and the resourcefulness to adapt and to survive.
Brilliant. That's super interesting to hear, Roger. I have a follow-up question to that. In general, I understand that each opportunity is different, but in general, how much of a business success comes down to the founder versus the business plan versus just plain luck?
So I think one other element I would add, Pierre, is it's kind of like the market, because so much of whether or not a company is wildly successful
is whether or not either there's a massive existent market that they are able to take a different tack on and create a wedge and take it over, or there's a level of futurism and the founder has this vision for how a new market is going to emerge. And even though people may think they're crazy, people may think they're nuts, somehow, some way, they have that deeply held belief and they are right. So you can have a great founder and a great plan and a small market, and you're going to get a small outcome. So you really need that market opportunity to be there, whether it's creating your own or a massive market where you're able to take a significant share of that. I think it is always the case, and again, I think some people may disagree. I think most very, very successful investors will agree with this, is that kind of an A founder with a B plan will ultimately be successful, and a B founder with an A plan will invariably not. That a plan and a market opportunity does not compensate for a lack of leadership excellence. An fantastic founder can overcome a middling plan, but you still need that attractive market because, again, great founder, great plan, small market is still small outcome, which is why I led off with this notion that the prize needs to be big enough such that a great founder's skills can overcome maybe not the best plan at the beginning, but then they figure it out. Whereas the B founder, even given a great plan, will find ways to screw it up.
Brilliant. This has been the 20 quickest minutes of my life, I think. It was really interesting to listening to your thoughts here, Roger. I can see that you're an avid reader here with the bookshelf behind you. And today, earlier here, we did a recording for the Vested Interest, and we talked about a couple of book advice from Lloyd and myself here. So I just want to kind of finish off here today. Do you have any particular book advice that you would recommend to any founder or any investor for that matter?
Well, let me answer the question by not answering the question, and then I'll answer the question.
Brilliant.
more important than reading is writing. And I have found that the translation layer between here and here is so powerful, and that things that you're not even aware are up here when you force yourself to write and to get out thoughts will shock you. So I've learned more from starting to write through my blog, which I started in 2006. And now I occasionally write publicly, but I write a lot privately just for myself. It sharpens the thinking and it clarifies a lot of what seems murky into, when it's rattling around in your head. So let me just start with that, writing over reading. But reading is really important too. So I'm going to give you a book that I guarantee you no one has ever recommended that there, and I will tell you why. It's a book by a person named W. Edwards Deming, and the book is called Out of the Crisis. And W. Edwards Deming is probably the greatest legend in the sphere of quality management. He's who helped make the Japanese competitive in the auto industry. He brought his approach to U.S. automakers in the 1950s, and they told him to go away. So he brought it to Japan, and that's the reason why Japan brought the U.S. to its knees when they were so far ahead on compact cars and fuel efficiency and manufacturing expertise and zero defects. Anyway, what the book is really about, it's about focus on the process, not the outcomes. Like TLDR, focus on the process, not the outcomes. So it's a book about operations research, but it reads like a story, and it's got a bunch of case studies in it. And to me, that was probably the book that most shaped my thinking as a business person.
Strong words.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Roger, for giving us your time here today with us. It's been exceptionally interesting to hear your thoughts on the space. Hopefully we can follow up at some point later. Benji, Lloyd, to my co-hosts, great work today for another fantastic episode. And to all three of you guys, thank you so much. And we see you here soon.